In recent months, an economic standoff of biblical proportions has emerged on the North American border, with repercussions that could reshape not only the United States economy, but also the political and social landscape of neighboring Canada. A cascade of controversial remarks from former President Trump and ensuing countermeasures by a determined Canadian administration have set in motion a series of reactions that no one anticipated, while alliances that have long underpinned international trade seem to be crumbling under the weight of each new tariff and retaliatory measure. In a move that has shocked many analysts and everyday citizens alike, Canada is making the 47th president pay the price for what it perceives as an aggressive and misguided imposition of tariffs that have upended decades of strategic cooperation. Amid these developments, 80% of Canadian tourists, once a robust stream of revenue, have vanished almost overnight, while U.S. tourism revenues have taken a staggering hit, plunging into a localized crisis in key hubs like Las Vegas, Florida, and Maine. This leisure disruption is part of a much larger economic chess game involving a staggering $60 billion in retaliatory tariffs announced by Canada, a number that has resonated across industries from automotive to pharmaceuticals and beyond. The sequence of events can be traced back to escalating tensions following a series of remarks and actions from the Trump administration, including alarming accusations of smuggling fentanyl to poison Americans and subtle suggestions of land annexation. These incendiary comments ignited public outrage in Ottawa and culminated in a broad-based economic boycott that has deepened the rift between the two nations. Rather than engaging in protests or launching aggressive media campaigns, the Canadian government opted for a practical action strategy by leveraging tariffs and legal measures, a decision that speaks to a mindset of measured yet firm retaliation. Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada, who has long championed the country's independent economic policies, made it clear in a series of public statements that Canada would not tolerate what it described as unjustified, illegal, and misguided tariffs. This is the same Carney who has repeatedly emphasized the importance of national unity with the memorable rallying cry, "We are stronger when united," a slogan that has become both a comfort to his supporters and a thorn in the side of his adversaries in the United States. One of the most immediate casualties of this trade war is U.S. tourism. Historically, the flow of Canadian tourists to the U.S. has not only bolstered local economies, but has served as a symbolic reminder of the close cultural and economic ties binding the two nations. However, as visitor numbers have plummeted by 75 to 80%, cities and states that once thrived on this cross-border engagement now face an economic freefall. In Las Vegas, once known for its bustling casinos and entertainment arenas filled with Canadian visitors, business owners are now witnessing revenue losses that far exceed even the most pessimistic forecasts. Florida and Maine, both of which accumulated billions of dollars from northern travelers, now face losses as high as 90%, a downturn that threatens hundreds of thousands of jobs and has already contributed to an estimated direct loss of $9 billion in the tourism sector this year alone. Canadian tourism analysts have gone further, warning that if the boycott continues, the cumulative economic impact could be as much as 10 times greater than the current losses. In a twist of irony, while officials and economists originally viewed tourism as a stable, if not growing, revenue stream, the sudden collapse of this market segment now risks undermining the very foundations of the American service and hospitality industries. Not content with targeting tourism alone, the Canadian counteroffensive has extended deep into the realm of real estate investment and industrial goods. Canadian investors, who have long regarded the U.S. property market as a reliable arena for capital appreciation, are now retracting their commitments en masse. Traditional winter residents, or snowbirds, who previously spent their winters in the U.S. backed by leading-edge employment in states like California, Arizona, and Florida, are now selling off their properties or canceling extended stays, citing fears over inflation, deteriorating property values, and a pervasive sense of social instability. These developments are compounded by harsh immigration policies and a growing anxiety over neglected health risks, a situation exacerbated by sporadic outbreaks of measles in multiple states, a disease that had been all but eliminated through rigorous vaccination programs. Amid these myriad concerns, Canadian media have chronicled a climate of fear where stories of arbitrary detention, targeted harassment, and unexplained deportation add fuel to the growing distrust in U.S. governance and public health standards. In response, the Canadian government, under the stewardship of Mark Carney, has unveiled a multifaceted retaliation strategy that not only targets individual sectors, but also seeks to transform Canada's long-term economic blueprint. The centerpiece of this strategy is a series of retaliatory tariffs valued at $60 billion, directed primarily at U.S.-made industrial goods. These tariffs encompass a wide range of products, from automobiles to steel and aluminum, and are designed to strike at the interconnected web of supply chains that form the backbone of the U.S. industrial base. Carney's administration has been meticulous, articulating its rationale with clear economic arguments. We do that with regret in the sense of we're responding to unjustified, illegal, and misguided tariffs. This statement, made with a mix of measured regret and resolute determination, encapsulates Canada's stance. The aim is not merely to counter the immediate financial blow, but to initiate a broader reevaluation of North American trade dependencies, urging a pivot away from unilateral policies and toward multilateral cooperation with other global economic powerhouses. One of the more provocative aspects of this unfolding drama is Canada's consideration of aligning more closely with the European Union. A survey by Abacus Data found that 44% of Canadians support the idea of joining the EU, a notion that, if realized, would mark a striking departure from decades of reliance on the U.S. market. Canada's strategic pivot towards the EU is hardly accidental. With policy overhauls on the horizon, including the potential adoption of EU laws, overhauling agricultural, regulatory, and trade frameworks, and even the transition from the Canadian dollar to the euro, this proposal reflects a willingness to transform fundamental aspects of the nation's economic structure. While the possibility of full EU membership is laden with legal and political challenges, not least among them the need to substantially reform parts of Canada's legal system and trade tax structures, there is also the Norway model, which allows for full access to the EU single market without formal membership, and the Switzerland model, based on a series of bilateral agreements that carve out a more flexible yet still binding framework. Each option presents its own advantages and trade-offs, but taken together, they signal an openness to reinventing Canada's economic identity in the face of U.S. domination. And while joining the EU might seem like a leap into the unknown, approximately 44% of Canadians believe that such a pivot could stabilize the economy in a way that counterbalances the persistent influence of U.S. policies. It is essential to appreciate that none of these moves are taken impulsively. Canadians have long maintained a sophisticated awareness of the intricacies of international trade, a fact that has been underscored by the common refrain that Canada didn't answer with words, it responded with strategy. The careful navigation of this economic minefield reveals a government that was prepared well before these recent events. Legal frameworks, contingency plans for early elections, and an array of domestic initiatives, all designed to blunt the impact of U.S. tariffs, have been put in place. For instance, in response to the closure of the Windsor car assembly plant, a casualty of Trump's decision that resulted in 3,600 Canadian workers suddenly facing unemployment, Canada chose not to engage in tit-for-tat titration against auto parts, rather reserving retaliatory measures for finished vehicles that did not comply with USMCA standards. This calculated choice was made because targeting auto parts would have risked disintegrating the very integrated production systems that underpin North American manufacturing. One might quip, with a dash of irony, that if these decisions were a recipe, then Canada certainly isn't one to throw the baby out with the bathwater. After all, one must preserve the entire machinery if one wants to fix the engine. The ripple effects of these measures extend far beyond the immediate trade corridors. The U.S. automotive industry now faces an unprecedented challenge, as estimates suggest that the cost of each domestically produced car could increase by up to $3,000, while vehicles assembled in Canada or Mexico might witness an even steeper rise of up to $16. These price hikes will not be isolated to the luxury segment of the market. Rather, they will affect a broad cross-section of American consumers, exacerbating an already precarious cost of living crisis. Meanwhile, sectors tied to metal production, including steel and aluminum manufacturing, have reported an 8% decline in production in the first quarter of 2025, a reduction that is among the sharpest in the last 5 years. Such declines have sent tremors through the U.S. stock market, with indices like the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones recording significant drops. Recent reports from global financial institutions, including JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, have indicated that the U.S. stock market has experienced its largest drop in 6 months, with confidence waning among investors who now see these trade conflicts as symptomatic of deeper structural weaknesses in U.S. economic policy. And if you're wondering whether any of this is calculated fun, you might note that even Trump's own economic formulas, which assign arbitrary tariff rates based on divisive calculations of trade deficits and export volumes, have left many scratching their heads in disbelief, as if economic policy were reduced to a high-stakes game of darts, where the aim is to hit the bullseye while blindfolded. In this context, it is worth considering the broader implications of this trade war on the fabric of international relations. The long-standing symbolic bond between the U.S. and Canada, once considered as near inseparable as two peas in a pod, is now fraying under the pressure of escalating tariffs and counter-retaliatory measures. As Canada deepens its ties with the European Union and potentially explores models akin to those of Norway and Switzerland, American influence is expected to recede. The ramifications are both economic and strategic. The loss of Canadian market access would represent a major blow to entire supply chains that depend heavily on close cross-border cooperation. From wheat and aluminum exports to pharmaceuticals and electronics, the potential disruption of these supply chains could weaken domestic production and unsettle industries that have long been thought resilient. Trade experts warn that such a shift in alliances could have a cascading impact, potentially precipitating a global economic recession if similar policies catch hold elsewhere. It is a scenario where, as if orchestrated by fate with a cruel sense of irony, one nation's attempt to dominate winds up dictating the decline of its own economic prowess. Amid such turbulence, it is also vital to highlight the domestic policies championed by Mark Carney to counterbalance these external pressures. Carney's government has introduced measures aimed at bolstering the economic welfare of Canadian citizens. Notably, income taxes for low-income families have been cut, allowing each household to retain an additional $825 per year. A decision that, in the grand scheme of this trade war, underscores the government's commitment to mitigating the personal impacts of broader economic strife. Simultaneously, Carney's administration has abolished the carbon tax, a move designed to alleviate the burden on farmers and small businesses, and has even expanded the dental care program to nearly 5 million Canadians. These domestic measures stand in stark contrast to the tariff policies implemented by the Trump administration. One cannot help but note, with a wry smile, that while Trump's policies might make your breakfast cost twice as much, Carney's approach is somewhat akin to putting extra frosting on an already challenging economic cupcake, ensuring that everyday Canadians feel more protected amid the storm. For those following this unfolding narrative, it is important to pause and consider the broader implications. Is this tariff war merely an economic spat between two nations? Or does it represent the unraveling of a once unshakable alliance that defined Western economic cooperation for decades? When U.S. Vice President remarked, "We've had an economy that rewards people who ship American jobs overseas and raises taxes on American workers, and we're flipping that on its head," the underlying message was clear. This is a radical shift in American economic policy. And yet, as the dust settles, it is evident that these policies may have inflicted more damage on the very fabric of the economy they hope to protect. Rising commodity prices, a steep decline in production, and a loss of consumer confidence are all symptomatic of a trade strategy that may eventually lead the U.S. economy to the brink of recession, a scenario forewarned by the International Monetary Fund, which predicts that continued trade tensions could cause global economic growth to slow and the U.S. economy to shrink by up to 2% in 2026. For viewers who appreciate in-depth analysis and nuanced perspectives on unfolding global events, consider subscribing to our channel and joining the discussion with a like or comment. Your thoughts and engagement help us continue to provide comprehensive coverage of these critical topics. And speaking of discussions, let me ask you directly, how do you think these escalating tariffs and geopolitical shifts will affect the relationship between the U.S. and Canada in the long run? Share your opinions in the comments below. We truly value your insights in this constantly evolving narrative. Adding another layer of complexity to the shifting dynamics is the political fallout from these economic decisions. Historical precedents speak volumes about the perils of escalating tariffs. Former figures such as Senator Rand Paul, and even historical voices like those referencing tariffs from the era of President McKinley in the 1930s, have cautioned that such measures invariably lead to dire political consequences. In one ironic twist, a former Australian Prime Minister, John Howard, laments that tariffs not only fail to protect domestic jobs, but merely increase local prices, echoing the sentiment of countless economists who argue that economic policies driven by short-term political gains often lead to long-term national losses. It is a situation so paradoxical that one might jest. It's almost as if the idea was to strengthen the economy by making everyone too broke to fight back. A quip that, although sardonic, captures a sliver of the public's dismay over these deeply flawed policies. As global markets reel from a series of retaliatory tariffs, not only from Canada, but also from the European Union and other key trading partners such as Japan, the United Kingdom, Australia, and even remote locations like the Penguin Islands, the United States finds itself at a crucial crossroads. The EU's recent imposition of $28 billion in retaliatory tariffs on U.S. products, including cars, wine, and agricultural products, has further underscored the vulnerability of the American economic model when faced with a coordinated international response. According to data from the World Trade Organization, U.S. industries such as steel and aluminum have already seen production declines, while consumer products across a variety of sectors have experienced price hikes ranging between 5% and 15%. The cumulative impact, economists warn, could push the U.S. closer to a recession in the last quarter of 2025 if these policies persist. Indeed, as the entire global market braces for what some are calling a tariff storm, investors are left wondering whether the practices once justified as protective measures might well be the very catalyst for widespread economic turmoil. The U.S. stock market, known for its volatility, has seen its indices plunge significantly, with losses in both the S&P 500 and Dow Jones continuing to accumulate. And while the administration projects an image of control and decisive action, the reality on the ground is one of stark uncertainty and growing discontent among American consumers and business leaders alike. Every tariff, every retaliatory measure seems to add another layer of complexity to an already fragile economic sandwich, leaving the average citizen to shoulder the burden of policy miscalculations that, ironically, were supposed to fortify national strength but have instead deepened the economic divide. Beyond the immediate financial ramifications, the long-term strategic consequences of this escalating trade war could shift the global balance of power. As Canada contemplates a realignment of its economic alliances, potentially even inching toward full association with the European Union, the United States risks not only losing a trusted ally, but also ceding influence in critical geopolitical arenas, such as the Arctic region and European security networks. The strategic recalibration is evident in every decision made by the Canadian government, from the imposition of targeted tariffs on non-compliant U.S. auto imports to the broader shift toward integrated European trade protocols. This concerted effort to diversify trade relationships highlights a pragmatic, albeit bold, realization. In a globalized world, isolationist policies often come at a great cost. And if you're wondering whether these shifts might someday lead to a more measured international approach, consider this an invitation to reflect on the choices that define national destiny. After all, if Canada, with its well-documented commitment to social welfare and long-term stability, can chart its own course despite economic pressures from its neighbor, might there be hope for a broader realignment of international trade principles? Even as the U.S. administration continues to defend its policies by touting them as necessary for protecting domestic jobs and industries, the evidence increasingly points to a scenario where such measures have become self-defeating. The story is one of unintended consequences and ironic twists. President Trump's decision to impose a 25% tariff on steel, aluminum, and automobiles imported from Canada, which he once argued was a step to liberate America from its dependency on imports, has in reality initiated an economic chain reaction that is affecting nearly every corner of the U.S. economy. From the closure of key manufacturing facilities leading to immediate job losses, such as the temporary shutdown of the Windsor car assembly plant that left 3,600 Canadian workers without income, to the skyrocketing commodity prices that threaten to erode consumer purchasing power, the repercussions are widespread. Even humorous observers might remark that while Trump once dreamt of building a tariff wall to shield the nation, it appears that the wall is built not of bricks, but of mounting costs that now imprison the American middle class in an ever-tightening grip of financial strain. Throughout this economic maelstrom, the narrative remains one of determination and resilience, but also of caution. Mark Carney's unequivocal stance against the burdens imposed by unjustified tariffs serves as a counterpoint to what many perceive as a reckless economic gamble by the Trump administration. Carney's call for early elections on April 28th, designed not only to solidify a mandate for future reforms, but also to reaffirm Canada's control over its destiny, underlines a profound commitment to national sovereignty. The message is clear. While external pressures may be mounting, Canada will rely on its internal strength and strategic foresight to weather this storm. And as the debate continues over whether these measures are a strategic masterstroke or an economic blunder, the question remains, can Canada, with its robust social policies and international outreach, maintain unity and prosper in the face of unprecedented external aggression? At the heart of all this turmoil lies a critical and timeless question. Is the aggressive imposition of tariffs truly the pathway to economic prosperity, or does it merely sow the seeds of division and instability? As we observe the unfolding drama, a saga that encompasses everything from massive job losses in key industries to significant shifts in consumer behavior and global market confidence, we are compelled to reflect on the long-term implications of such policies. This isn't merely an isolated trade dispute. It is a reckoning with questions of national identity, sovereignty, and the very nature of international cooperation in an age defined by interconnected economies. The contrast between Trump's tariff-centric approach and Carney's comprehensive strategy not only fosters a deep sense of irony, but also poses a direct challenge to conventional wisdom. Who would have thought that in trying to protect domestic jobs, one might end up paying an indirect tax burden of up to $6 trillion, and in doing so, risk the collapse of a once stable economic order? In the end, as we continue to witness these historic events and deliberate on their far-reaching consequences, one must ask, what is the real cost of protectionism, and who will ultimately bear the brunt of this economic tug-of-war? Will the United States eventually find a way to recalibrate its policies in order to rebuild international confidence and restore balance to its markets? Or will the drive for unilateral control lead to a fragmented global economy where even the closest of allies must eventually contend with the bitter fallout of isolation? These questions, laden with both dramatic intensity and sober economic analysis, invite us all to think deeply about the future of international trade and diplomacy. If you're intrigued by the complexity of these economic battles and appreciate detailed expert analysis on issues that shape our world, please consider subscribing to our channel and leaving a comment with your thoughts on this dramatic trade war. We'd love to hear from you on whether you think Trump's policies will ultimately backfire, or if there's a hidden strategy that might just pull the United States out of this tariff-induced quagmire. After all, in times of unprecedented economic uncertainty, every opinion counts, even if it's delivered with a pinch of irony or a dash of sarcasm, much like noting that while Trump may have set out to make America great again, he seems to have made everything inexplicably expensive instead. As the curtain falls on this chapter of unresolved tensions and strategic recalibrations, one fact remains undeniable. The era of unchallenged U.S. dominance in North American trade is drawing to a close. What was once a symbolic relationship celebrated for its robust exchange of goods and ideas is now mired in an increasingly hostile environment where punitive measures replace cooperation and suspicion overshadows long-standing friendship. The interplay of tariffs, counter-retaliations, and the emerging possibility of Canada aligning more closely with the European Union signals a seismic shift not only in economic policy, but in the geopolitical landscape as a whole. The fallout from these decisions continues to reverberate across industries and households, threatening to reshape markets, destabilize supply chains, and ultimately redefine the economic relationship between the United States and its neighbor to the north. In contemplating the future, one cannot help but reflect on the broader ramifications of this tariff war. A war in which, as one analyst dryly noted, the only thing more expensive than the imported goods might be the price of friendship. With each punitive measure and every retaliatory tariff, the bonds that once held this transnational community together are being tested. The worldwide reaction from Japan and the UK to Australia, and even isolated outposts such as the Penguin Islands, underscores a global consensus. Unilateral actions, no matter how well-intentioned in the eyes of some, invariably disrupt the delicate balance of international trade. And so, while the United States braces for further economic headwinds, it is forced to reckon with the fact that its policies are not operating in a vacuum. Instead, they are part of a broader international fabric, one that is now visibly fraying under the strain of isolation and self-interest. In conclusion, as this complex saga continues to evolve, it remains a story of high stakes, bold strategies, and profound, sometimes ironic, economic truths. The actions taken on both sides of the border are a reminder that in a deeply interconnected world, every decision carries consequences that ripple outward, affecting not only the leaders at the helm, but also the everyday lives of millions of citizens. Whether this trade war will reshape global alliances for generations to come, or prove to be a temporary detour in the ongoing narrative of international commerce, is a question that only time can answer. For now, we look on with a mixture of analytical precision and cautious hope, eager to see if, in the end, common sense prevails over the allure of short-term victories at the expense of long-term prosperity. What do you think? Will the escalating tariffs and the potential realignment of Canada's international partnerships ultimately lead to lasting change in global trade? Or are these measures merely a prelude to more instability and uncertainty ahead? Share your views in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for further updates and insightful analysis on this and other critical global issues.